Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing great. Thanks for tuning in. So in today's video, I want to edit a couple of images from my latest vlog from Lake Kashi together with you in Lightroom and Photoshop. So if you didn't see that video, go check that out. I'm gonna put a link up here. And yeah, let's jump into it. Alright, so here we are in Lightroom. We're gonna look at a couple of images. This is the first one, and it's also the reason why I was on this particular location on that day. It was to shoot this gate in the lake. This is the final image after my black and white conversion and after I worked on this in Lightroom and Photoshop. And as you can see, there is a lot of contrast between the gate and the background. So the idea that I had in mind originally for this location was a really minimal shot with a lot of fog and mist in the atmosphere, which of course I didn't get because if you saw the vlog, you saw that the weather was really good. Actually, it was too good and too sunny, so it was really difficult to get separation. So I had to find other ways, some workarounds to achieve the same or a similar result in post-production and also during the shoot itself. So one way I found to achieve that was to shoot wide open on my telephoto lens. So combining the telephoto lens, which compresses everything but also helps separating elements that are far from the lens from elements that are closer to the lens. Combining that with shooting at f4, so wide open, to get more blur. As you can see here, I was able to get a really blurry background that contrasts with this really sharp gate here in the foreground. So the actual shooting process wasn't too difficult, but I had to fiddle it a little bit with the post-processing to make it look good. Because if you look at the original file here, which is this one, if you see this in color, it's really dull. There is no light, there is nothing going on, there is nothing interesting in this particular frame. So you had to work a little bit to get this to stand out and to make it a minimal and interesting image. So let's get started and see what I did. Let's go into develop module. And as always, the first thing that I do is always applying these two checkboxes, so remove chromatic aberration and also enable profile corrections. This particular lens that I use, my telephoto, is really old, and if you shoot wide open, the chromatic aberration is pretty severe, so I always recommend to click on this one. And I always click on profile correction, even if Lightroom doesn't have a profile for this particular lens. So as you can see, there is a little bit of barrel distortion here in the horizon line. I'm not going to worry too much about this in Lightroom. I'm going to fix that in Photoshop later on. But I think it's good practice to always keep this open and on for every image. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to convert this to black and white so I can start editing. And as usual, I go here into my profiles and I select my favorite one, which is the camera monochrome with red filter, which, as you can see, really helps making this gate stand out. Because of course this gate is red, and by using the black and white filter with the red filter helps bringing out all those red colors and details. So now it's a black and white image, but of course it's really different from this image. There is much less contrast, so we need to do something to make this more contrasting. So I like to start as usual with a simple S-curve. I'm going to go here into my tone curves, and I'm just going to take a couple of points, one in the shadows, and I'm going to bring it down so my shadows and my background gets darker. And then I'm going to get another point here in the whites, and I'm going to bring that up until I'm happy with the results on the gate and in the water. So probably something like this. I don't want to go too much, not to make it look unnatural by doing something like this, you know. So maybe something around this point. Okay, so just a simple S-curve, but really helpful to get contrast. By doing this, as you can see here, the water is getting a little too bright and a little washed out. So I want to preserve the details in the water at this stage. So one way I can do that is by lowering the highlights here. I don't want to lower this too much because otherwise the water gets really dark. So probably something around -40. And by doing this globally, as you can see here, the gate actually gets a little bit dark. So I want to counterbalance that by bringing up the whites. So I'm going to go here in the whites, and usually I like to counterbalance that roughly in the same amount that I lower the highlights. So in this case, I think I'm going to go up to something like +50, just so I get a really nice amount of white here in the image without clipping any highlights, as you can see here in the histogram. And then another thing that I might want to do, as you can see here, the blacks are not down to the darkest point of the histogram. So I'll probably go just a little bit down here on the blacks. So I make sure that my background here gets a little bit darker. I think probably something like -10 will be good enough. And that's pretty much it. The only other thing that I will probably do here in Lightroom, but I can also do in Photoshop afterwards, is to remove this really annoying black spot here. So I'm just going to zoom in to 100%, get my spot removal brush, make it a little bit bigger, and just paint this out, like so. So I get rid of this distraction here. And this is pretty much the amount of work that I did on this image in Lightroom. I'm going to jump into Photoshop by exporting this particular file. As always, I export this as a PSD file in the ProPhoto color space in 16-bit with a resolution of 350 pixels per inch. I'm going to jump into Photoshop. Alright, here we are in Photoshop. This is my image. And here in Photoshop, what I would usually do is add my film grain, do any spot removal, any finishing touch, any vignetting, any sharpening if needed. But in this particular image, what I also want to do is correct the perspective. So I tried to shoot this image really centered out with the gate in the middle of the frame. But of course, by not being 100% exactly parallel to the gate, there is a little bit of a parallax that you can see here. If I put my rulers on, you can see here that this part is not 100% straight, and probably this line as well is a little bit off, not too much, but just enough for me to notice. And also probably here in the water, because as I said, this is a really old lens, so Lightroom cannot correct for it automatically, so I always get a little bit of a barrel distortion. So I want to get this perspective right, and I'm going to do that in a really easy way, just by duplicating this layer. I'm on PC, so I'm going to do Ctrl-J to duplicate the layer, and then I'm going to do Ctrl-T to transform, and then I'm going to right click on this image and I'm going to select warp, and by doing so I can drag any of these points and I can warp the image in any way I want. I can go something really crazy like this, and as you can see, it changes the image dramatically. But in this case, I want to do something really subtle, which is just bringing up this part of the gate so it's completely symmetric with the other side. So a really easy way to do that is just to hold Shift and then click on this border here on this corner and bring it up until this line is almost perfectly aligned. And on the same way, I can go here, hold Shift, and bring this part a little bit up. Not too much, just a little bit, so this main line here is straight enough for the eye not to feel it's weird. And then I can also check these vertical lines, but these should be fine. So if I check here, these are basically the same. This line here in the middle is also almost in the middle of the frame, if not 100% in the middle. So let's say I'm pretty happy with this. Maybe I want to go just a little bit down, maybe more down here, because the water is getting a little too much distortion here. And maybe I want to go a little bit more up on this one. Nothing too crazy, but yeah, something like that. And then I'm going to press Enter to apply. I can remove all these guides here, and my perspective is corrected. Now I can see here is not perfect. When I actually did that for my vlog image, it took me a little bit more time, but this is just for showing you how to do it, so I'm not going to spend too much time doing this. But as you can see, it's not a huge difference, but the gate definitely looks more symmetric in the frame. So once I do that and I have my perspective all sorted out and fixed, another thing that I want to do from the start is getting rid of this rock in the water, because I think the eye goes here a little bit too much, and I would prefer to have just white water here in the foreground. Again, there are many ways to do this. Probably the easiest way to do that is just to create a new layer by clicking here and then selecting the spot here in brush with J on the keyboard. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and I'm also going to zoom in on the image a little bit more, and then I'm going to try and see if Photoshop does a good job of removing this rock. And as you can see, it's not the best job. You can try probably another way. You have to make sure that content aware is selected here and sample all layers is selected, so the tool looks at all the layers that it has behind this particular layer here. So let's try again, maybe with a smaller brush, trying to get a bigger section of the water. And this time was a little bit better. Again, not perfect, but it's just to demonstrate how to do this. Another thing that I want to do while I'm here, removing this distraction, my eyes keep going to this white tree here. I think it's a tree in the background. It's a little bit too white, so my eyes keep going to this particular place in the frame, which I don't want, because one is out of focus and two is in the background. So I'm going to also remove this with the same tool, like so. This should be really easy. And again, Photoshop did a fairly good job. And I think these are the only two big distractions that I had in my frame. So let's say I'm happy with this. Another thing that I want to do to this image, as you can see here, the water is a little bit dirty, if you know what I mean. You can see some of the shadows here, because of course the sun was setting behind these trees here, so the scene was backlit a little bit. So you can see some of the shadows here and some of the movement in the water, which I don't particularly like. So I want to try and get this water a little bit more white and more minimal. Again, lots of ways to do this. What I like to do is I like to create a duplicate layer of what I did up to now, and you do this by selecting all the layers that you have, and on Windows you have to click on Ctrl-Alt-Shift-E and you get a duplicate layer. And then on this new created layer, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to select the dodge tool with an exposure of about 20%, and I'm going to brush in like so. To get rid of all the shadows here. You do that, the more distractions you get rid of, but be careful not to do it too much, otherwise it just everything turns into a white kind of white canvas. So yeah, something like this. It's subtle, but if you turn this on and off, you can see there's a pretty huge difference between the two, and I think this looks much better than this. Alright, so next we have our white water. We remove distractions. The next thing that I want to do is to apply film curve to this and some film grain. So again, I'm going to select all these layers, group them with Ctrl G. I'm going to call this blend. And then I want to duplicate this as a layer with my usual combination Ctrl-Alt-Shift and E. So I get a copy of this group of layers, and on this new layer I'm going to apply my Silver FX Pro. And again, I don't need this global adjustment, I don't need the selective adjustment, I don't need these color filters. What I need is the film types. I did try many of these and in this particular image I think this one, the Agfa APX Pro 100, is the one that looks the best and gives me more contrast, so I went for this one. And in this particular case I think the grain on this film simulation is a little bit too tiny, so I went from at 350 on the grain here, so the grain stands out a little bit more, and I like the effect especially here in the blurred background as well as in the water. So I'm gonna apply this to my image. And here we have the before and after. So we're almost done with this image. The only other thing that I want to do is to create even a little bit more of contrast between this gate and the background, and I think the only way to do that at this point is to brighten up the white part of the gate here. So again, many ways to do it. I like to do this in a different way this time, which is by creating a new layer by clicking on Alt and click on the new layer. And I'm going to select the mode overlay and fill with 50% gray, so I get this gray layer. And then I'm just going to do a simple dodging with the brush. So I'm going to select my brush with B on the keyboard, make sure that white is selected. I'm going to select an opacity of about 20%, make this brush a little bit bigger, and I'm going to brush in some white on the gate. As you can see, it's really subtle, but it really helps making the gate stand out against the black background. I try not to overdo this too much, but I think just a little bit of contrast is good in this situation. Something like that. As you can see, it was really quick, really easy, and also really effective if you do a before and after. It is subtle, so it doesn't stand out so much, but definitely makes a difference. So yeah, we're almost done with this image. The only other thing that I want to do, we already have a vignette here, but I want to increase this vignette, especially here on the bottom, because I think the white here is too white, especially if you think about this image as a print, and you have maybe some matte paper here, which is also white. You want to get some kind of separation between the paper and the actual print. So I'm going to add a vignette on the top and also one on the bottom. I'm going to do that by adding a new layer for exposure, an adjustment layer. I'm going to put this to -1. And let's do the top one first. I'm going to select my gradient tool, white to black. I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard, click and drag, so I get a really nice gradient. Again, really subtle, but it draws your eye to this gate in the middle. And then I'm going to do the same for the bottom, so another one, exposure, -1, still my gradient, hold shift, click and drag. And I really like how this gradient worked out here in the water. If you turn it on and off, as you see, it's really subtle, but again, it draws the eye to the main subject, which is of course the brightest part of the image now. It's brighter than the water itself, so your eye is always going to go to this gate here and not to the water. And that's it for this image. This is all I did. Again, it's a little bit more than what I usually like to do to an image, but the condition again were not the best, so I had to do with what I had. And I think the final result is actually pretty good. Again, not the best image that I ever took, but definitely a nice minimal shot of this gate. Alright, on to image number 2. This really nice sunset view of Mount Fuji from Lake Kashi. You can see Mount Fuji here, the red gate of Hakone Shrine here on the right, and the setting sun here on the left side. Seen like this, it's quite a nice minimal image, but if you look at the original file, it's actually pretty different. This is the original file. So as you can see, it's a nice picture, nothing great. It's a little bit colorful, and there is not so much separation between the parts of the image, and you cannot really see the gate here of Hakone Shrine very well. So I did some trickery in Lightroom to make it look more minimal and more like I wanted to. Also, I got rid of this floating thing here, this object, and I tried to make this gate stand out a little bit more. So let's see how I did that. Let's jump into the develop module and let's start doing our usual stuff. So profile corrections, remove chromatic aberrations, and convert the image to monochrome with red filter. And already you see we have a nicer image overall. Next thing, my usual global contrast, which I do with my S-curve. So I'm going to try to bring down a point here in the midtones and the shadows and lift up the whites here to give it a nice contrast. Then one thing that I notice here, the highlights are clipping, so I'm going to turn down the highlights globally to -50, and maybe I should probably go slide down with this slider here, not too much, something like that. And I also want to bring down the exposure slightly, let's say -0.5, half stop, and bring this a little bit higher. It's kind of a balance thing. You move one slider and then you do something else, you need to go back and move the slider that you just changed to make everything perfectly balanced. Something like this, I think, gives you a better look in this way. Next thing, before doing anything else, I just want to get rid of this really annoying object floating here. So 100%, get my spot removal tool, get it a little bigger, and just get rid of it. Ooh, didn't do a really good job. Yeah, something like this. And of course you can see there are lots of white spots here because it's a really long exposure, but I'm not gonna go on and delete all of these for the purpose of this video. For the actual image, I went in and deleted all these really small white dots. So let's go back. Another thing that I want to do is I want to make the water a little bit whiter to create more separation between this line of mountains and the foreground, the water here. So I'm going to do that with a gradient filter. I'm going to select the exposure and I'm going to raise that to +1. And I think I want to counterbalance that exposure with lowering a little bit of the highlights, maybe something like -30. And let's see how that looks. I'm going to hold shift and create a nice gradient for the water. Something like this. And I think it looks really nice, but I don't like all these small waves that I can see in the water. I want to kind of get rid of that and make the water more minimal. And a really nice way to do that is to use the dehaze slider basically against its purpose, which is remove haze. If you use minus values here, you can actually create haze in your image or in parts of your image, which is what I'm going to want to do here in the water. So I'm going to make this dehaze maybe something like -50 or something like that. And as you can see, the water becomes much more ethereal, much more minimal, and it looks very good overall. So that's it for this gradient. Next thing that I want to do is I actually want to make the sky darker to create even more contrast between the top part of the image, the middle ground, and the foreground here. So I'm going to create a new gradient, and this time it's going to be a -1 on the exposure. And let's see, let's get back to 0 here and see how it looks. I'm going to hold shift, drag down in my sky like so. And it looks fine, but it's definitely not dark enough and not balanced enough. So one thing that I want to do is I want to bring these white parts in the sky a little bit higher. So maybe +20 on the whites here, or something like that. Maybe even 10. something like +10. And I want to get, yeah, maybe the shadows slightly darker, something like -20 or so. And I want to create a little bit more contrast here in the sky. And I can do so by using the haze slider this time for the purpose that it was made. So if I do a +20 on this one, you can see the dark parts of the sky gets darker and the whiter parts of the sky gets brighter. So something like this. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just to show what I was doing. And I'm probably gonna keep it something like this so it doesn't touch Mount Fuji in the middle, so Mount Fuji stands out a little bit more because it's brighter. Alright, so the image already looks much nicer. I think there's a couple of things that I still want to do, and let me zoom out a little bit more. I think I should have a little bit more separation in this middle ground here, because I can see a difference between these two lines of trees, but I cannot really see the gate here, and I kind of want to have this part a little bit brighter overall. So I'm going to do that by using not the gradient filter, but by using a radial filter. So I'm going to select that, make sure I reset everything here. And what I want to do here for the horizon is, first of all, let's create our filter here, and let's put it on our horizon line, like so. And then I kind of want to lift the shadows a little bit more and see how it looks. So I'm gonna raise the shadows maybe about 50 or something like that. And as you can see, with just one simple touch, you can see much more here of the line of trees. And I really like how there's different gradations of gray here between the trees and Mount Fuji. And also I can see the gate a little bit more. So I'm gonna play around with this a little bit more. Maybe the darks are not dark enough, so I'm just gonna lower these blacks just a touch, like -3 or 2 or something like that, -2, so I don't clip anything. And yeah, probably I can lower these highlights here. So if I do a -20 or 30 on the highlights, I still get separation here, but I don't get any bright highlight. So this is really good. Let's say done. And then I think I just want to make this gate stand out even more. So I'm going to try with another radial filter here, and I'm going to draw it around the gate, like so, a really small one. And most of this part is in the shadows, so I want to be kind of subtle, but I think if I just lift the shadows by maybe 10 or 20, something like this, you can see the difference. It's not huge of a difference, but you can definitely see the gate much better, and it looks quite natural, like that. So yeah, this is everything I did to this image in Lightroom. Let's jump into Photoshop to finish it up. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. The image, I think, already looks really nice the way it is, but I just want to do my usual film grain, black and white film conversion, and also get rid of some details that I don't like in this image and make it look even more minimal. So the first thing that I want to do, and if you look at this image by zooming out and zooming in, maybe for you it's different, but for me, the only thing my eyes go to is this really annoying small white cloud. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this cloud. So I'm going to create a new layer and select my spot healing brush by hitting J on my keyboard. Make sure that I can sample all layers, make it slightly bigger, and I'm going to just try and delete this thing. Perfect. So it's really subtle, but see, no one would ever know that there was a cloud there. But if you remove it, your eyes definitely stop going there and focus on this part of the image, which is brighter. So small touch, but really, really important. Another thing that I want to do is to create more contrast, so I'm going to do my usual S-curve here. So, and I think overall this image is quite dark, so I'm going to try and lift it up a little bit. So I can click on this icon here. So whenever I click on the image, I'm going to select that range of brightness. So I can go where the image is quite bright, like here, and get a point and brighten it up, like so. And I don't want to overdo this, so I'm going to get a point in the shadows here, and I'm going to bring that back just a little bit. So overall the image is lifted, but it still maintains a nice contrast. If you see a before and after, you see it's a pretty dramatic difference. So that's good for contrast. Another thing that I want to do is add a top vignette and a bottom vignette to focus the eye in the middle of the image. So I'm going to make an exposure adjustment layer with my usual -1 on the exposure. Select my gradient with G, hold Shift, drag down, like so. And I'm going to create my top vignette. And again, same thing for the bottom of the image. So -1 on the exposure, gradient, hold Shift, drag, and boom. Much better. So now that I have my let's say my basic edit, I think I want to focus a little bit more on brightening this part of the image slightly, because I think it should stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to do that by zooming in, creating a new layer by holding Alt on my keyboard and clicking on the new layer, and then selecting overlay in the mode and fill with 50% gray. In this way I'm going to have my dodge and burn layer. Then I'm going to select my brush with a white opacity. I'm going to stay at around 10% with a flow of 10 to 30%, so my edits are not so strong. And then I'm just going to go in and gently paint white over my gate. And it might not seem much, but even with just a 10% increase, this is the difference. So I'm going to do that a couple of times just to make sure I can see this gate, like so. And if you turn this off and on again, you can see it's a pretty huge difference, and I can now really see this gate even from far away. I really like the balance between this and Mount Fuji and the light here on this side. Alright, so maybe if I was doing this for a portfolio, I will go on and just delete all this part and make it darker, just by simply getting the black color instead of the white, with an opacity of maybe 30%, and just painting in a little bit of dark color here, because this part is not really interesting, and I kind of like the fact that it fades away into black. So I'm not going to do that for this demonstration, but it's definitely something you can play around with, and it makes a really huge difference in this case, because it's a big distraction to have stuff here. Okay, the image looks really nice, so I'm gonna do my film grain by selecting everything that I have and doing my Ctrl Alt Shift E to duplicate everything into a new layer. And then I'm going to apply my Silver FX Pro filter on this new layer. Alright, and as usual I'm going to go into my film types, and I think for this particular image Acros looks really good. You can see a before and after here. This is without, this is with the filter. I really like how it brings everything together. I really like this light here on Mount Fuji, and I think the grain is slightly too small for my taste. You can't really see the grain very much, So I'm going to bring the grain down to 400, which I think looks much better. So this is a before, and this is after. It looks more organic. It's much better overall. So let's apply this. Okay, so here we have the image before and after. Everything looks good. The only thing that I noticed is that by applying the filter here, I kind of lost my bottom vignette. So I'm going to do another one. It's the same concept as before, so I'm going to create a new layer for exposure with a -1. Get a gradient with G on my keyboard, Alt Shift, and drag up to get my vignette. And that's it. Really simple, as you saw. We just went from this, I think, average black and white, kind of interesting shot to a much better and more minimal shot. Just by doing simple things, no layer masks, nothing really complicated. And I think it's really nice, the balance between the elements and how the gate and Mount Fuji stand out with this sunset light. Alright, so that was my edit. Nothing really difficult, but hopefully you found this video somehow useful and you can use those techniques in your edits. That's gonna be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Consider subscribing to the channel. I have a couple of photo trips planned for the next 3 or 4 weeks, so I'd really love you to see those. So if you click on subscribe, remember to ring on the bell so you get notified every time I upload a new video. Alright, so that's gonna be it for today. Enjoy your day, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!